Perfect. Now, today we are going to work on this grid that I took from Bath Ambition. This is, of course, just for the sake of practicing on Webflow. And this grid over here consists of several items or tiles that are driven towards categories. Now, let's evaluate what we're having here. We are having on the bottom a grid system consisting of tiles, and let's check this. The designer who created this or who illustrated this, because this is from Bath and Beyond, is telling us that on hover, this is how it will look like, sort of a circled border for the tile picture, and the actual name of that category of that tile item is going to be colored on this blue color. And also we are having at the top of this UI our say tagline and headline. Also, our designer is telling us that on mobile we are having 3 columns for those tiles, and also that we are having a show more button. Now, just to be clear, we on this HTML creation of this exercise will not work in any sort of functionality to shrink this up. This can be done with code, and we're actually only going to care about the layout that a developer is going to require to do this. However, this layout is telling us that we're having this show more button for mobile, so we're going to do that. This being said, let's go towards Webflow and create our project. We're naming this AIL. Perfect. And my first step will be to create a section that contains our container, or the say the block that is going to have all of the content. And I am going to check for the approximate width of this container on the design, and I'm having approximately or roughly 1080 pixels wide. So I'm going to use that measure in here. So let's create a div that is going to be turned into our section, and let's call it section number 1. Perfect. And let's get inside of this section in another div block that I'm going to call container number 1. Now you'll notice that I always name all of my classes, and this is sort of a practice that I've found very useful to keep consistency across my designs, and also that is often very useful for whoever is going to work with this in the future. We'll see more of this when we work on complete projects, but just as for now, it is worthy for me to advise you to name all elements with classes. Perfect. So this being said, my section is going to have a padding or intolerant margin of 80 pixels. I do this for the sake of the elements not getting to touch the borders of the screen when having this in small screen. Let's say that I'm having something like this over here. Let's just imagine for a while that I'm having a very small screen. I do not want this pillow to be touching the edge of the screen. I want to have some sort of space for this design, for this UI to breathe. So this is why I'm creating this pattern over here. And next, for my container, I am going to assign a spacing center like this, so that the element gets center even for large screens. Okay, and also I'm going to assign a width size of 100%, and a max width of 180 pixels. Now, just be clear and to recap on how did I came up with that 1080 pixels. Well, I just evaluated what the approximate or roughly rough size of these container is on my design, and I'm having approximately or roughly 1080, okay, something like this in here. So that is the why I am using this over here. Now, inside of our container, I am going to create two div blocks that will correspond to this headline over here, or this section of the top that I'm having over here. Okay, and also I am going to create another one for the bottom that will contain the actual grid system. So let's do this. I'm going to call this top wrapper number 1, and I'm going to call this as bottom wrapper number 1. So inside of the top wrapper, I am going to have those two elements in here. I'm going to have a tagline and a headline. So I'm going to drop up a text for this tagline. I'm actually going to call this let's say top tagline number 1, and just below it I'm going to create a headline type of text item, and I'm going to call headline number 1. Now let's work on those elements styles. For the margin for this headline, I'm going to have 0 at the top and 0 at the bottom. And I always like to get rid of those predetermined styles that Webflow assigns to all of the headlines. I'm going to have a h2 for the sake of thinking that this is the element that is inside of a sort of homepage. We actually don't know. We just have this design over here. But let's say that for our exercise, it might be convenient to use a h2 headline. I'm of course assuming that for the sake of having something to practice with. Now, I'm going to check this element styles. I notice this is Times New Roman and this is 42 bold. So let's try to see if we're having a similar or look like. We actually do have Times New Roman here, and we're going to assign this a text size of 42 pixels. I always use 1.3 em or 1.6 em for the height of the line. I use em because of this is a proportion of the pixels that we're having for the size of this text, so that if we manage to change this to, say, for example, 22 pixels on mobile, I will not have to reassign a height for the a height in pixels for this mobile layout, because of the height is set to em, which is a proportion of the size that if I change 22 pixels, I'm sorry, if I change the 42 pixels to 22 pixels on this text size, the height will, because of this is em, will immediately correspond to those 22 pixels in the same proportion. Okay, next, let me get this centered, and let me check on the color, which is sort of a almost complete black for this text. I'm assigning this color, and I'm actually going to create a swatch just to reuse this color if ever needed this in the future. Let me copy and paste this text over here, and next I am going to work on the styles for the college. Oh, I forgot to get this bold, perhaps. No, it is bold. Okay, perfect. Now let's work on this college word. We're having a Montserrat 12 text, 12 pixels, and I am not actually, oh, I am having monster here, so I'm going to use it. Perfect. Let's assign this line height to, let's set this to 1.3 em. And let's get this to bold. I believe this is bold. Yes, it is bold. Next, let's get this to be capitals. Okay, let's rewrite this to be coolish. Coolish. Perfect. And finally, let's get this centered and blued like this. All right, here we are. So let's check for the size. It seems like it is almost there. Perfect. Yes, it is. Okay, next let's jump to the grid system. So we're going to build this as follows. Let's get a div block inside of our bottom wrapper. Okay, and let's call this sort of grid container red box number 1. No, for this grid, I am not going to use the grid because I'm noticing that the elements over here are centered, and a standard grid is not going to allow me to do that if we're having a dynamic number of items. Instead, we're going to use a display flex layout that we are going to get centered and aligned to the start. So we are going to drop a div block inside of this that we are going to call tile, let's say grid tile, tile number 1. And inside of it, we're going to drop a link block because we are assuming that all those elements are going to be links. So let's get this to be a link block. Let's call this tile link number 1. Perfect. Now, this is interesting now. We are going to have 2 sections for each tile. A top one that is going to relate to the picture and the bottom one that is going to relate to the text. So inside of this link, we are actually going to create those 2 items. Let's drop off a picture over here. Well, we're actually going to create 2 div blocks. So the first one is for our picture at the top. We're going to call this tile top number 1. The bottom one will be tile bottom number 1. Inside of the top area, we're going to drop a picture. However, we are going to do as follows. Let me show you. We are going to create a additional div block that we can call tile pick wrapper. And we are going to check what this wrapper should be. Now, I'm going to create this wrapper so to have a circular border when hovering this element, when hovering over this element. So I'm going to check what the size of this circled outline border is. We're having this amount of 135 pixels. So I'm going to set this to 135 pixels approximately. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I'm going to explain this first. Okay, let's get a picture set to, let's say 100%. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Okay, let's name this picture as tile pick background number 1. And now let's get this picture wedge to be 100%. No, I have in my tile to be rounded like this. So I'm going to have a 1000 pixels for this particular picture here as the radius. And also I'm going to set this overflow to hidden like this. All right. So next that I am going to do here is having this picture at the background to be opacity to 0. And also I am going to have this tile pick wrapper to have a border set to 1 pixels. And also I'm going to check to this to be the blue color that we're having in our design like this. Actually, let me just create a swatch to reuse this color whenever required. Now we're almost there. Now we are missing the picture to be in here. And for that particular picture, I am going to use a background like this. Now I'm setting that background to be approximately 80% and non-repeated, something like that. Okay, we are almost there. Almost there. Let me get this to be as well. Say 80 pixels. Let's say it's 70 pixels, like that. Perfect. Now, what are we doing here? Let me just show you. We have created inside of our top area, we mean this entire area over here, right? We have created on this top area a container that have 2 elements. First, we have a tile picture wrapper that we're going to use to convey this circled shape with a border, a blue border, and with a background picture like this. And we have also created a invisible picture at background. Now, why is that we're having this invisible picture at background? Well, this is kind of a trick that I am using to set this entire tile picture area to be perfectly square, regardless of this item to be 135 pixels or 100 pixels or whatever its size is. And this is important because if we are dealing with a layout that is going to be shrinking depending on the size of the screen. I will tell you more about this within a few minutes. Okay, now let's create the things at the bottom. We're having a text line that is having 16 pixels, and this Montserrat. So we are having a text area with, let me show you, 16 pixels. I'm going to call this tile text or tile name number 1. So we're having the centered 16 pixels. I'm going to use 1.3 EM as the height of this line. Also, I'm going to set the color of this element to be, oh sorry, I'm not going to actually set the color of the element to be the blue. So I am going to use the link element to assign the color for this over here, and we're going to use black for the default state. Now, what I'm going to do here, what I'm doing, let me show you. I am not assigning the color for this tile, for this text, into the element of text itself, but rather I'm assigning the color on the link element that contains this text. And the reason why is that the link is the element that is going to allow us to play with the hover state. So on this link element, not the text element, I'm going to set the color to be black. And also within this link element, I am going to set the decoration to be none so that we get rid of this underlined decoration on this text. And the reason I'm going I'm doing this on the link element is that we want the element on state hover to be blue like this. Okay, this is the only reason we are doing this. We are assigning the color on the link rather than on the text itself. This being done, let's check for this text to be to have a negative spaces of approximately 5 pixels, but I'm going to use a negative space letter space of negative. Let me try it with 0.2 em. That is way too much. Let me try 0.1, 0.05, and I can't use less than that, so let me get just to -5 pixels. Maybe 1 pixel, 0.5 pixels, that is better. Okay, so I am using 0.5 pixels. That is quite of the equivalent to this that we're having on this design on XD. Now, what do we have left? For this tile top, we're going to assign a space margin at the bottom of approximately, let's say, 10 pixels, or maybe less. No, definitely less than 10 pixels. I'm going to use 5 pixels to separate this top element from the bottom element. Notice that I'm using the top element that is right next to the one that I want to separate this with or from, rather than using a internal element to set up this margin. And the reason why I'm doing that is I like to set margins to be on the elements that I'm going to separate one of which order. This is just for the sake of following a pattern on the way that I assign properties to classes, because of I like my work to be consistent, and that is beneficial to myself and also to my clients and people who is going to mess with my work in the future, so that they have sort of a consistent approach to how things are done, just for being organized here. Okay, so we are almost there. What do we have left? No, we have to get this element border color to be like that only on hover, for which I am going to try the following. Let me get this. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, I'm going to do the following. Let me get this grid element, I'm sorry, title link to have this. Okay, this is loading, this interaction over here. Kind of slow now, Webflow. Sorry, and I apologize about that. Let me reload this page to see if it works now. Okay, let's try this once more, shall we? Let's go to interactions. Let's create a element trigger on hover. Okay. Let's get an animation started. Let's call this hover tile grid number 1. And my action will be this element over here to have a border color set to blue on hover. Perfect. And also, oh, I'm sorry, I set this element to a different target. The target that I am having is the tile pick wrapper. Okay, perfect. And also, I am going to create another animation for the hover out. It's going to be almost the very same that we're having here. We're named this number 2. And on hover out, we're having this border to be transparent like that. Note that I have assigned that I can get rid of this color over here and set this to transparent, and let me get this test out. Perfect, and here we are. So basically what we did is to have a animation or a interaction set to this tile link, so that when hovering over this tile link, the tile pick wrapper will have its border blued, and when hovering out of this tile link element, our tile pick wrapper will have its border to be transparent. So creating this effect over here, that is kind of what our designer tried to represent on this UI. Now, I believe that maybe we could even improve this if we made this interaction to occur faster. So I am going to go towards this interaction settings, and I'll set this to be 0.1 seconds. Save this. This is of course entirely a matter of personal taste. Feel free to do as you consider it better, but I just like this to be a little faster, and here we are. Perfect. Now a final touch here will be to have this element trigger to affect the class. So every class named hover tile grid number 1 will be affected, and this is just a quick way to tell you why is that I name every single class over here, because of it is allowing me to do things like this very, very, very easy. And also the why I assign a different class name to every single item that is different from each other. So I do not use classes like having a grid tile reused for elements that are different, and then I assign subclasses to make the differences noticeable visually between the two elements that are completely different in purpose. Because of if I did that, then working with interactions like this will be just a headache. No, this being done, let's work now with my grid. Let's just get this multiply a lot of times. I am actually pursuing to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14 elements. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's great. 3 more over here. Perfect. I think we are down here. So our grid. Oh, I'm so sorry. I duplicated the elements that are not supposed to be duplicated. I duplicated the link elements. I didn't duplicate or copied the grid tiles themselves. So here we are. Perfect. Here we are. Now, this grid box is going to be having a children wrap option, which is allowing us to have the elements that are not fitting pretty well at the top to go towards the next row, right? And also, we are going to check if our tiles over here are matching our design. We're having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tiles on the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. Perfect. So it seems like it is almost there. Just check that we're having the right number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And here we're having only 5. So I will get one tile deleted for the sake of getting this almost done. Or perhaps we can just stick to have 6 over here. Very well. What do we have to do next? Okay, so we're having approximately 15 or roughly 15 pixels of separation between this top wrapper and this bottom wrapper. So on the element that is at the top, I'm going to assign this space towards the other element at the bottom. And here we are. Next, and just for the sake of getting this a little more nearby what the final product might be, I am going to export and use this picture over here for one element, for one of the elements. Okay, so let me get this exported. Pick sample number 1. I'm going to export this as a JPEG. Let me say this 18% quality. And for web, let's get this exported and let's get this uploaded in here. Here we are, perfect. So for our tile pick wrapper, we are going to assign a image gradient or gradient background to be this picture over here. And this being done, let's just test how it looks like. And it just looks pretty nearby what our design is having, except that we should have a little separation between the elements from the top to the elements on the bottom. Actually, we're talking about 40 pixels, roughly 40 pixels of separation, for which we're going to assign to the grid tiles a margin towards the bottom of 40 pixels like this. Now it looks better. It looks kind of more similar to what we have here. What do we have next? Let's tackle the responsive modes. Okay, so for tablets, I used to reduce the 80 pixels padding on tablets to 40 pixels like this. And it seems like it can just work fine in here. There's no reason why I should get this shrinked even further. Yeah, it definitely works like that. Now for landscape, mobile landscape, I might want to get the tiles to be smaller. So here's when this tile picture background will help us out. Okay, what we're going to do here is having this flex grid sizing to be modified to the following. We're going to set this grow to show you 0, the shrink to 0 as well, and this basis we're going to have this as as 20%, or maybe that is way too little. Let me get this to 25%, and here we are. We're basically having now 4 items in here for mobile landscape. Now what it did here is setting 0 to grow would tell this grid, hey, I do not want those extra grid tiles to take the full size of the row if they have space for doing that. If I will have set this to 1, then this will have happened, but hey, I want this to be aligned to the center, so grow to 0 is just fine. Now I haven't shrink to 0 because I do not want any of those pictures to get smaller than the size, the ideal size that I'm assigning to each one. And next, the basis is going to be my ideal size, which I am setting to 25% of the row that contains this. Or say differently, every single of those items will take 1/4 or 25% of the row space for a total of 4 items. Now, for mobile portrait, I'm going to do 33% so that I ensure that we will have 3 columns like this. And also, I am going to set the padding to be a little smaller, like 25 pixels, just like that. Perfect. Okay, that's perfect. So we are having almost this very same layout. Let me get this college a little separated from the bottom word just to follow what our designer is telling us to do. So I'm going to set a 20 pixels margin between college and padding. Let me check that out. And yes, we're having 20 pixels. I will check the size of those text. We're having 12 and we're having 30. So this is 12 still. This is going to be turned into 30, but I am actually going to assign that in mobile landscape 30 pixels so that those 30 pixels gets inherited to the mobile portrait as it is in our design. Finally, I am going to create another element for this show more bottom. Now, I am going to create that element and style that on desktop so that it gets inherited on styles to the other elements that are next to it. So inside of my container, I'm going to create this div block that I'm going to call bottom wrapper number 1. And inside of it, I'm going to create my actual bottom, which is having roughly 48 pixels height, and we're having a text of 15 pixels bold Montserrat like this. So I am creating a, a link block. I like to build bottoms and link block with link blocks, but you can actually do this with a actual bottom block. So I'm going to create this as a bottom. Okay, bottom number 1. That is going to be maximum 48 pixels height. Now the reason I'm using this as maximum and not as height is because if for whatever reason the text inside this will get too large, my bottom will immediately adapt to that size. So I'm creating, I'm sorry, it is not maximum. I'm creating a minimum 48 pixels for the height of this bottom. What I'm going to do next is to drop a text inside of this bottom that will say show more, like this. Okay, so I'm going to do a bottom text number 1 for this class name, and let's check again. This is 15 pixels bold Montserrat, so I'm going to use 15 pixels, 1.3 for my EM for my height, and I am going to assign the color for this button in the actual link item instead of doing that into the text. So I'm going to use blue for the color. I'm going to set the decoration for none. Then again, I'm working over the link item instead of assigning the decoration for the actual text inside the link. Perfect. I'm going to set this to bold. And next I'm going to set this to be Montserrat, like that. Now for my button, I'm going to have a layout, flex, horizontal line to the center and justify it to the center. And also I am going to create the margins or the borders for this bottom to be this gray color and 3 in size, 6 for radius. So I'm going to have on my button a border with 6 pixels on radius, a solid style for the border, 3 pixels width for border, and this gray color that I'm going to turn into a swatch as the color for the margin. Now you will notice that button is actually taking the entire space over here. Maybe that is what our designer is trying to tell us to do on our design. So I'm going to leave it as it is. But if we wanted this button not to take the entire size of the space, we could just set the display to justify to the center like that. Now, finally, I am going to add some padding to the bottom. I'm going to stick to use 10 pixels to the top, or maybe 12 to the top. No, 10 is just fine. And I'm going to use 15 pixels padding to the elements on the center. And the reason I'm doing that is if this text happened to be larger, or if this button happened to be centered like this, then our margins are going to allow us, or pattern is going to allow us that the button name or text inside button does not touch the borders of the button. So I just created the button on desktop, and the reason I did that is that despite of this button only going to be shown on mobile, I want to provide flexibility to the future, or convey future proof to this button in case it is ever used on desktop. If I assigned those styles only on mobile, then I will have to do that on desktop again if I ever needed the button to be seen here. Instead, if I do that on desktop, the properties, the visual properties are going to be inherited to everything below like this. So what I'm going to do is to set the bottom wrapper element as display none on desktop, which is going to be inherited to tablets, which is going to be inherited to mobile landscape. And next I am going to assign the display to be like this on mobile portrait, just like that. So on mobile I'm going to have this layout over here. Perfect. Now what I'm going to do next is only answering to my necessity of getting this to look a little better on this particular video for you. However, if you're just doing this for a developer, you can just leave it as is, because of the developer is going to take care on setting a different picture to each to each tile, and to set different text names to each tile, and also to have this in interaction of only 6 elements being shown for mobile, and then showing the bottom on mobile only. This is all going to be done with code, and of course this requires having a store and functionality, and it is going to be on the hands of a developer. Maybe you are a developer, but for the sake of this exercise, this is it for now. However, I am going to artificially set different pictures for each of those tiles, just for this to be a little closer to this that I'm having over here. Not exactly the same, but just closer. So what I'm going to do next is to get those pictures over here exported. So let me just copy and paste that over here. Okay, let me get this deleted. And I'm going to be exporting all of those pictures over here. Just checking those are correct. Okay, there they are. So I am going to export all of those pictures. By the way, you can totally jump all of what I'm going to do next, because of technically you already have the HTML. But if you want to follow me on this exercise. Let's do it now. Okay, so I am going to get all of my pictures into Webflow right now. Just importing them. Just a second. Okay, here we are. And what I'm going to do next is to assign a subclass to each of those tile pick wrapper elements. So I'm going to call this example 1 and so on. Because remember, this is not necessary. It is likely to be assigned with code rather than this that I'm doing right now. But this is only for on the sake of getting this a little closer to what I have on this assigned for your you that are viewing how to create this on YouTube. So I am assigning subclasses to those tile wrapper elements that are going to allow me, right, to have variations on the elements that or backgrounds that those tiles are having. So each subclass is going to allow me to change the background without actually affecting anything else that the class itself is having by default. So this will allow me to have individual backgrounds for each subclass. And this is just going to be a very quick exercise for the sake of visual convenience. Now, I'm going to have this over here to have this picture. So this second tile, or this example number 3, is going to have perhaps this over here. This one is going to have this pillow. Oh no, I have a pillow already, so let me use this one over here. Okay, example number 12. So I'm having this over here. Perfect. This one over here will have this one. This one is going to use that one. This one over here is going to have that over there, and so on. Almost there. Thanks for your patience. And finally, here we are. Actually, I'm not going to bother with the text. It is like quite boring already for you, so what I'm going to do next here is just to evaluate again that everything is working as it should. So I'm going to hit publish and check this out on the browser with this development mode. this responsive development mode. So I'm checking this. It looks kind of cool. However, I am noticing right away that the text is kind of messing with each other. So I'm going to get this fixed as soon as I can via having a little margin over here, like 3 pixels or 2 pixels might just do. Let me get this published. And let's get this tested now. Okay, this looks kind of better. So this is how it looks like on really huge screens. Zooming, all of the text is kind of the same. And actually, let's get just this tried out with a little real text. I'm not going to bother with having all this exactly the same, but I do like to try my designs with a little of reality, of real data. I mean, not like actual real data that will be so time consuming and very inefficient. However, just a little data that can allow me to prove or test if this can actually hold up real data. That's it. Like, it is very it will be very bad if our HTML couldn't hold data that is going to be used on it, and then our HTML will be quite useful for what it is supposed to do. So I'm going to hit publish again. Let me check this out very quickly over here. It looks like it will just work, and let's refresh this, and it doesn't work. No. What's happening here is that I am having those grid tiles to be shrinked. This is something I definitely do not want to happen. So let's get this published again. Now what I need to do next is to have the basis for those tiles to be a determined percent. Like maybe 12 will do, and definitely 12, and try 13. No, 12 is better. So I'm going to have this basis so that even if the texts are different for each tile, all of them will follow a similar structure. Just like this. Next, I'm going to make sure the size of my pictures are set to 100% or to fit whatever this is 7 here. Perfect. 100% display layout. And let me test this once more. And here we are. So, what did I do here to get this fixed, and why this was happened at the first place? So, because if I had different lengths for the texts on those tiles, each of those took a different, say a different size when rendered on a big screen. And this is, by the way, the importance of testing your HTML with nearby real data, because of you might have something beautiful as we had before, having different text lengths in here, but only when we faced a little, or we added a little reality to this HTML, we noticed like, okay, it is not going to work. If our developer added real data here, and some of those tiles will have a large name like this one and a shirt like this one over here, it won't just work. So that was the reason why this was happening. Now, how are we going to fix that? Well, first of all, we are setting width 100% to all the elements on the picture so that we make sure that the picture is going to be stretched out to its maximum. Secondly, for the grid tiles, for each of those grid tiles, we are assigning the following measurements. First, we're going to set the basis to be 12%, right? So that it will be allowing this number of 8 tiles to be stacked one next to each other, and it is basically dividing 100 between 8, and we're going to have this number over here. We're going to have 12 as the magical number. If we tried out 13, then a smaller number of rows will be able to fit in here, but 12 is just going to do for us to have 8 in here. And next, we set the string to be 0 because we do not want that any of those tiles get reduced to be less than 12%. And also we set the grow to be 0 as well because we do not want any of those tiles to grow larger than 12% if having room to do so. And this is how we actually got to fix that. Now, for tablets, we might not be pretty good with 12%. We might be better with 20. Of course, they're not giving us any reference for tablets, so we're just doing what we can with it. So we're assigning 20%, maybe 22 will be better. I will just take to 20% to have 5 tiles in here. For mobile landscape, I think 25% is going to be good, and we already have 33% for mobile. So let's hit publish again and test our design, or test our HTML or grid. And here we are, it is just working as it should on this design over here. Okay, it is just doing its work, and that's it. Let's try this out on a smaller screen, iPad Pro. Okay, it just looks fine. And here we are, perfect. So that's it for now. Thanks.